by
what were the two biggest changes? What were the two biggest changes in British society in the 20th century, and where did they come from?
I'm sure you have an idea.
Well, it was the two world wars. The two world wars were the biggest things that changed British society. The First World War made it clear that the British Empire was a creaking structure that could no longer hold, and the Second World War destroyed it utterly and turned Britain into an impoverished nation that had to scratch around in the dirt for the IMF for 20 years. And those are the events that change. It's not this slow incrementalism. It's not the will of the people. And if you look at some histories of the lead up to World War II, you will see that what happens is they turn the board over and lots of people die because the end of the process, because the end of the process, when they have power and you have not, is that they just come and kill you. And that's happened thousands of times over in human history. And that is the story of the Second World War. It is the fact that if you don't want to play ball with what became global power, they will just come and they will kill you.
Yeah, that has happened. As I said earlier, like the opinion of the will of the people is not the only way things change. I did say that. It can also happen by massive military attacks, either revolution or wars between nations, and that's a good example of it changing in that way. They also changed by the change of the will of the people. And the whole of World War II was whether it was right or not. It was ultimately something that a lot of people agreed with. World War I, not quite as much. World War I was more about the elites.
In the 1940s,
no, not the American public. Not so much the American public. That was a bit different. And so, again, I'm not saying it's the only way things can change. I never said that.
But again, the American public did not want to go into World War II.
No, I know. That doesn't argue against me.
Which is why we had a little psyop happen.
Even if you want to go by the direct action route, which is maybe what it will take, like the direct violent action route, the military action route, which may be what it will take in this case, you still need to persuade people that that's the correct thing to do. You still need to have enough people together, organized around the understanding of why they're doing it and how to win. And to do that, you need to affect culture. Yes, you can't just come out of nowhere and say, but I'm right. That's how you get actually killed.
Well, no, but there's a concept called vanguardism, which is the fact that really what you don't need the public. The public are useless, they are passive, they are clueless, and they just want to live their own lives. They do not want to be part of your political movement. They find politics annoying, confusing, and they find it something that they can't grasp in the abstract because most of them are not intelligent enough to do so. And that is just true. If you look at the societal makeup,
I can see exactly what's happened
or they don't have the cognitive energy in order to expand upon it.
I can tell you exactly what's happened there. That is
do not have the cognitive ability.
That is a failure of self-confident intellectuals to communicate politics in a way that is simple and easy to understand.
No, people don't care.
No, people very clearly care. People very clearly care. They don't need to comprehend it in the sense that we would.
I'd say
the public are not intellectual. They don't need to be. They learn by living through it. They learn by adjusting their heuristic based on what they experience. And that takes time, but if they experience something bad associated with something that is, political, then that'll change their politics. And gradually, it does happen.
Not necessarily, because
it's already happened.
No,
and especially if you have a charismatic, confident figure, it aligns with that. We have all the ingredients we need for an actual democratic change.
Not when you integrate propaganda, then the heuristic doesn't necessarily form a cognitive neural network. It actually doesn't matter. Even if they don't trust the press, it's just based on seeing something once. It's the primacy effect. You see something once, people will recall that. Even if they don't necessarily trust the press, they will see and remember and recall. It has happened consistently. This is one of the strongest effects in all of media psychology.
Gradually, they'll stop looking at what the mainstream press says and look at what someone else is saying instead.
Doesn't matter, just seeing it once. Just seeing the headline.
I get it, but the legitimacy and the scale of the right-wing influences on this matter are growing every day. And people are switching from their mainstream sources, which they don't trust anymore, which are collapsing, by the way, to alternatives. This is exactly the pattern I would expect if my theory about how things change is true.
But it isn't. And you can tell that by reading a history book.
Scrump, even if you were completely right about history, even if this had never happened before, it can happen now. It hasn't happened.
I
know you think
it can't.
But even if, because things are so different today, than they have been in the past. There's so many new factors that you can't look at the past and say it hasn't happened before, therefore it can't happen today. And again, be careful not to assume what I'm saying when you don't know what I'm saying.
Quite consistently. It's the issue is that change happens top down. It does not happen bottom up.
I don't think it always does. Sometimes it does, not always.
There is no such thing as bottom-up change.
There's one way that I could interpret what you're saying that I would agree with, which is that I believe that Orwell's conception of the changing of power is probably correct, that you get a sort of a cultural middle class, a cultural elite, and then the bulk of the majority. And when the elite's in charge, they rule over the majority, but gradually their caprice and evil becomes more clear, and the middle class work to persuade the majority, and again, not technically persuade. And then they switch over. The cultural middle class becomes the new elite.
The history of the
cultural middle class in that case becomes the new elite, and then the cycle renews again.
It's not happen.
It demonstrably doesn't happen. You can't show an example of when it has happened.
Pretty much any change in influence of power is
not an answer. Give me an example. Give me a specific example that illustrates and proves your point.
It's not even a matter. Any example I give you is one in dozens, but none of the. I don't need to give you a specific one.
Where is it?
Where is the specific example? Name me a change in power that's happened in human history. That's how broad this is. That's what I'm saying. That's the point. This is the pattern that everything follows.
All changes in power happen because of the actions of an organized minority who takes power.
But that's what I'm saying. That sometimes they don't do it with the consent of the people. That is not the same thing as
the popular.
No, I agree. Sometimes they don't do it with the consent of the people. Sometimes they're not backed by the majority, but they win that support either. They win that support either once they take power, or in many cases they are supported by the majority to do what they're doing.
The problem is that the majority of people will simply accept the system that is put before them. They will simply accept who is in power, no matter who that person is, because they are passive.
Unless their conditions are absolutely.
They will also gradually push towards something a little bit better. They've got a taste of Trump, and most people felt like they were doing better.
No, they absolutely will not.
Well,
people will absolutely not push towards what's better. They'll push towards whatever is most expediently, immediately rewarding and hedonistic for them.
Not always. I will, but I don't need to prove this because it's already happened. In 2020, the scale of election rigging demonstrates that the public are on, at least Trump's side, to whatever extent we agree with him. It's already happened.
Yes, and it doesn't matter because he still lost.
Well, okay, but then what you're saying is, okay, Uzalu, you're right about the public, being powerful and winning and being important for this.
But they're not.
No, they cheated that one time, so it'll never work. It'll never work.
We don't agree on either.
No, I know, but that is the result of what you just admitted.
If one American election can be quote unquote stolen, then all of them can be. How would you know? Maybe
that's like saying if you can get one corrupt politician, then they'll always be corrupt. They're not necessarily.
Yes,
there's quite a few I know you think that, but there's quite a few politicians in Congress right now in the US who I don't think are corrupt. I think Trump is not in the Congress, obviously, but he's one of them. He's an active politician. These things can change. Even if they're still corrupt, they're corrupt from a different influence. And that's still change, which is better. But I don't think they are in this case. I don't think they are. Maybe one day they will be, but they're not right now.
You should always assume that your opponent is corrupt.
Yes.
If you want to win. That's just game theory.
Mm-hmm.
You should always, in terms of politics,
expect them to cheat.
Yes. I certainly know our opponents are corrupt in this case, but I don't always assume my allies are corrupt, which you appear to be doing.
Well, you should do in many cases until you can prove otherwise. The thing is,
politics is a game, and therefore, right.
And all that,
but one way of playing the game is in the genuine, truthful, principled way that people today are.
No. You know what? Okay, so Uzalu, just today I reread Johan Huizinga's Homo Ludens for the video I'm working on, and he's writing that in 1938, and he is coming from the exact same position that you are, where he thinks that he's waxing poetic about the play debate and the gentleman's agreement of the House of Commons, right? And he's talking about how excellent it is. This is 1938. I can understand why he's very hopeful at the time, but there's absolutely none of that left, I think, in that sort of thing that he's describing from 90 years ago.
Well, most of what we've been talking about just now was about the US. It's a little different in the UK, as we know, because the problems
he talks about it in the US as well. I'll pull it up.
Well, regardless, in that case for the US, he turns out to be right. Because as you see today,
it's in American politics, He says in American politics, it is even more evident. Long before the two-party system had reduced itself to two gigantic teams whose political differences were hardly discernible to an outsider electioneering in America, had developed into a kind of national sport. The presidential election in 1840 set the pace for all subsequent elections. The party then called itself Whig. It then called itself Whig. Had an excellent candidate, General Harrison, in the 1812 fame, but had no platform. Fortune gave them something of an infinitely better symbol. Whatever, like it just goes on. But he's saying the exact same thing happens in American politics. There's no reason for me to go on.
You are going
the exact same thing of this.
You are going to tend to have a you're going to have two sides in public discourse because that's normal. It's easier. It's simpler. You're going to tend to have two sides, and then once those sides are fighting for long enough, you will gradually get a tendency towards those with power to make legislation, occasionally making power which benefits them too much, and so they end up splitting themselves off as a sort of aristocracy, which is not how it's supposed to work. But that's inevitable.
No,
they do that, and then they end up being unjust because their motives are now corrupt in a sense. And so then they become a single. Hold on, we're not finished yet. They become a single entity opposed to the people. So they become the two parties of the system again, and then you get one replacing the other. This is all part of the same process, and what they're describing there is evidence that yes, this happens. But what we're seeing today is evidence that it can change. Now, again,
decisions will always be made by people who have the power to make them, and that is just division of labor.
But those people,
and you can't have a. Well, yes, they can, but elections don't change those people.
No,
they do. And again, not as much in the US and in the UK do they change because we have a different structure in the UK and it's got different problems. But in the US, most of the legislative power, in fact, probably almost all the legislative power is, and I know what you're going to say, but it's actually founded in the legislators. Whereas in the UK, we've got all these quangos and other issues. But in the US, the politicians do actually have the power. Now, I know they're all bought and paid for by the NGOs and by the whatever the cathedral is. Yeah, they're all they don't but that means they don't direct their own power. They let someone else do it for them. They still theoretically have that power. And so if you just get politicians in there who don't want to be corrupt, which I know sounds like a wacky, amazing concept, but we found some.
Kind of a wacky idea.
We found some. If you just get them into power, then you make change.
How would you get them into power?
Like we've already done, Aydin.
It doesn't matter what politicians you get into power, because Trump's the great example of that. In that, yes, you say, Trump was lied to, he didn't get much done because he was lied to. Well, he is one man at the head of a very large machine. America is not run by politicians. It can never be run by politicians. It is run by the giant permanent bureaucracy that is the American state, that has its own interests, its own entrenched leaders, its own power struggles. And that really is what shapes what happens in America.
And that's why they kneecapped. That's why they kneecapped Trump to try and get anything actually done, Uzalu, and you know that.
One word. Afuera.
What? Who?
How's it going? He's already been. He's also being hindered in his attempts to do that.
But he's made great strides already. He's already removed a bunch of institutions that weren't necessary. I'm not saying Milei succeeded completely.
And when
therefore Trump can succeed. I'm not making a black and white argument here. I'm saying that he's made progress, and that's the right thing to do. That's what Trump should do as well. And it's also what Vivek wants to do, and I suspect Vivek will be VP, so that's going to influence Trump's opinion. Vivek said he won't be VP unless Trump does do that. What do you mean it's not going to happen?
Ultimately, will always end up in incrementalism. It always ends up in
happen. The president in the US has plenary power, essentially, whether he should or not, with executive orders.
No,
he can just.
And then when the next person comes in, they just undo all of it. Biden undid like half of all of Trump's.
The next person that comes in is not a Democrat.
Executive orders in the first day.
What if the next person that comes in is Trump's heir apparent, whatever
However,
it ends up being?
That is not. Well, I mean, that's how I would like it to go, but in terms of the democratic system, that's not going to happen, and that's not historically. That's not how it happens. It's a trade-off every single time, is it not?
His spiritual heir. What if you get another 2 terms of Republicans who are
historically, it's not how that happens.
It could be this time. Actually, you say that, Aydin, but in the UK, we've had conservatives, or whatever you want to say about them, for a lot more than one
whatever
term.
That means for the UK Conservative Party.
The point is that it's been common in the US to switch between parties consistently, but it doesn't have to be that way. We're in a time of great change right now, and you could see that change.
Nothing really changes in terms of different political parties being in power.
And that, Scrump, is something that people have said throughout history and been wrong about it too.
But it is true. If you look at the structure of the American government post World War II, it has grown during the 1960s, but it has never structurally changed that much. It has always been, again, the problem is if you're a politician, you make rules, you make laws. Those laws are implemented on a ground level by a giant permanent bureaucracy that is never cycled out.
And how long has it been
there
since the 60s? About 60 years? And how long is the generally agreed upon sort of large, long
This goes back to Jekyll Island, man. If you want to talk about this, way before the 60s, come on.
But the point is, what Scrump said is since the 60s. And that's not long enough to make any judgments. That is one cycle. That's within the same cycle. Yes, we're still in that political paradigm. But we're exiting that paradigm now, at least potentially.
Well, okay, so I would say it goes back to Jekyll Island, which is what, 1920... What is it, Scrump? When's Jekyll Island?
So we've had a long cycle.
China the Fed.
13. Well, the issue is...
whatever. Early 1900s.
I think the biggest issue is you've tried to come up with your own political framework without reading, which doesn't work. That's the long and short of it.
It sounds like, unfortunately, you've tried to come up with a political framework with reading, which has its own problems too.
No, you are just completely wrong about that.
You buy the opinions of other people a little bit too much. You aren't as willing to form your own structures, even if they're correct.
You simply haven't read about the past is the issue. You just haven't read about
what would you say
before.
If I appealed to the authorities you're appealing to and then still disagreed with you?
I don't think he's appealing to authority.
I'm not appealing to authority. I'm saying you don't know anything because you haven't read anything.
No, he is in a broader sense appealing to authority here, not a specific one.
Yes, I am. I'm appealing to the fact that the body of human knowledge that we have accrued from different people is much larger than you can accrue in your entire lifetime. Yes.
But I'm not just accruing it from my own lifetime and experiences. I'm accruing it from a general understanding of history, even though I don't use the same method to absorb it that you do.
Well, then you end up being wrong. that's the problem. You end up
that's the difference.
Wrong.
We disagree, Scrump.
No, you have a lot of the things you talk about, oh, we need to see if this worked. It doesn't work. And we have large amounts of proof that other people have done that it doesn't work.
Again, we have already, in terms of Trump's movement, it's already won as far as getting the people on side. So a large part of what you're saying is definitely wrong and can't work has already worked.
It hasn't.
It has.
Yeah, again, Port Hemplo.
What?
No edifice, no matter how fragile, could ever fall, is essentially what you're saying. Our opponent has a fragile, dishonest, and widely hated edifice, and it has a powerful opponent now that's built up over many years. Of course it could fall.
It doesn't matter if it's widely hated.